Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. You're told in your well-being classes that you should do something that scares you every day. Standing up here in front of you scares me. So this is my scary thing for the day. Two things before we get going. There is a resource available after this session via QR codes on the NFFN stand. And that stand is in St Aldhates Church. And these two very strong advocates of NFFN. I can't say that very quickly. The other thing is, before I get going, I've been asked by Emma, who's still sat on the front row. The Woodland Trust, National Trust and Organic Research Centre are currently delivering an agroforestry elm test funded by DEFRA. The aim is to test a range of advice and guidance structures with farmers as they design and then apply for funding from agroforestry. So we're recruiting farmers for that test and trial, and my colleague Emma, if you're interested, would love to hear from you. So, natural flood management. Can I just ask the audience, has anyone here been flooded before? Yes. So you know what flooding's all about. Has anyone here, perhaps that plus, have you helped anybody clear their soggy possessions out of a flooded house? So, enough of you. Water is essential to life, but also can be life-threatening, and it's managing water that this session is all about. For context, government stats show that at least 1 in 6 people in England are at risk of flooding from rivers and the sea, and with many more at risk from surface flooding. So this is a really pertinent topic. And as we've all seen, the water that's coming for the last storms has really elevated this. So to deal with the issue, the UK government has a strategy for reducing the impacts of flooding, published by the Environment Agency and called the National Flood and Coastal Erosion Risk Management Strategy. Snappy, but it works. So that's shortened to FCERM. That has its own roadmap for delivery by 2026, and that includes natural flood management. So again, the government website says NFM uses natural processes to reduce the risk of flooding. These processes protect, restore, and mimic natural functions within catchments and on floodplains to slow and store water. Proponents of this form of managing floodwaters have been pushing hard for many years to get the concept of natural process to be considered in the mainstream. And this is often sat against very hard and very expensive hard engineering solutions. And many in the conservation of water sector also point to considerable benefits for biodiversity, for carbon storage, offered by doing NFM very well. In other words, doing NFM well should support our biodiversity and climate actions as well. In December 22, the Environment Agency published its evaluation of NFM, and following that, the then Chief Executive, James Bevan, outlined his vision, and I quote, for natural flood management to be seen shoulder to shoulder with the Environment Agency's programme of crucial bricks and mortar hard defences. And as we now see, there's millions of pounds of funding made available for natural flood management delivery through Environment Agency, Natural England and others. So it does look like NFM is on the agenda and here to stay. Bear with me. The mouth is drying up. We hear stories and see pictures of flooding events around the country and the world which can be extremely harrowing. With climate change, we know we are likely to experience more occasions when we either have too little water or too much water. Farmers and landowners are often on the front line of this weather and its implications, and yet they can be key to solutions which help other people. And some of the adaptations that farmers and land managers can deliver can be best described as natural flood management solutions. But it's impossible for any one landowner to contain a flood, but Nick's work shows us that working collectively, we can achieve significant reductions in flood peaks. And perhaps that's why we're discussing it here. We're at Oxford Real to make a difference. And probably we're all here because we know we need to work together to do that. So I think safeguarding property or life, or working with biodiversity, or working with natural processes, could be one of the most positive, altruistic things you do for your neighbours. And I think that's why Oxford Real exists, is to be altruistic and work with our neighbours. So, we have 4 fantastic speakers, and we'll introduce them as they come on. But I think we're all ready to go. So, our first speaker is Sam Kenyon. Sam farms regeneratively on her and her husband's farm on the banks of the River Elwy in North Wales. And she has direct experience of the devastating power of too much water and the journey to restore her land and riverbanks following those flooding issues. So, Sam, welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? I'm a bit nervous, so I apologise for the shaky voice. And hopefully I can work this okay. Okay, so hi, I'm Sam Kenyon, and I farm at Llanllyn Farm on the banks of the River Elwy in North Wales. I'm 9 miles inland from the coast, and I sit at about 30 metres, between 30 and 60 metres, just above sea level. I farm livestock. It's only a small farm. It's 160 acres, and 60 acres of that is broadleaf woodland on steep limestone rocks. So we sit in a bit of a bowl. I've got 80 acres of productive grassland, and as I say, we sit in a bowl with the River Elwy running through. So I've got 2 kilometres, on a small farm, I've got 2 kilometres of river that I'm responsible for on the riparian banks. The farm, I've only been there 7 years. The farm used to be tenanted in maize. I'm in like the sort of milk fields of North Wales, and there's a lot of big dairy in our area, and it was tenanted and it was in maize, and we moved in, and what we noticed was that during the winter, where you had like the bare soil left over winter, those fields were eroding away, and also the field edges were dropping into the river, so I was losing field edge. I think the most we lost was 14 metres over 4 years on one field. Not across the whole 2 kilometres, but on one field. No, I'm sorry, I didn't do many photos. So you just have to listen to me. There are some more, but I haven't got onto that bit yet. So I just wanted to give you some background on the farm, really, so you can understand the driver. So we also had fields that were tenanted to a neighbour, and he'd left them in pasture. So I had fields on either side of the driveway. The one that was at the same level, the one that was in maize stubble was starting to sit quite a bit lower than the pasture field. And I had a bit, oh, it's going through it itself. Is there a way of pausing it? So, sorry, I'm not very good with technology. No, stop. Oh, it's going through the whole lot.
What's that?
Was it? I didn't touch it.
I don't know either. Winterflow, do you want the first one?
I'll get onto it, yeah, you can look at that while I'm still talking. No.
It's got its own mind. We'll keep going backwards.
Yeah, and then we had another field that was in pasture that we'd re-fenced, and we'd have floods, and I had a bit of a daft moment where I thought that my fences were sinking into my pasture, and then I realised because it's in pasture, each time it floods, it's actually building up its depth. So it's distracting. It's actually building up its depth of soil and the ley. So it was kind of like telling me what I needed to do. So I took the fields back in hand and put everything back to grass. So I could capture the nutrients every time we had a flood. So I could keep the land in place. So winter flow, for the first 4 years, we had these slow floods, and I was a bit like, I don't know all the fusses about locally. They're not that destructive. I was a bit smug. I was a bit annoying. I just moved into the area, and I thought I knew best. And then 2020 came, and we had 3 big floods in just 2 months. So we have a cottage on the edge of one field, and it had flooded 7 times in 40 years, and now it had flooded 3 times in one winter. So the Amounts of flooding we were seeing were obviously increasing, and neighbours who have lived there for sort of 40 or 50 years were saying that the behaviour of the flood had changed. They were getting much more aggressive. We can go from the water being in the banks of the river to then flooding the house in 6 hours. So it wasn't giving us much time to sort of prepare for that happening. And if you can imagine the speed of that water coming from the 192 kilometre square catchment I've got behind me, it was quite scary. So I did the whole thing of jumping up and down to the Environment Agency in Wales, which is NRW. Who's going to sort this out? Who's going to, hold the water back? This isn't fair on me as a lowland farmer. My fields are washing away, all that. Again, a little bit entitled. Didn't realise no one's coming to save me. No one's coming to solve this. We, as landowners, can deliver the solution ourselves. So, badgered everyone for their information. I'm not educated in any of this, but I figured that people in the Environment Agency and NRW are. So I kept asking them to come out on farm to give me advice. And the geomorphologist, we didn't agree on everything because he didn't think that 9 miles inland I should be able to tell when the tide is in, but I can. And I know when it turns because the water starts dropping. But he was full of so much information that helped, and he explained that if we could scrape away our riverbanks, the edges of the fields, to 30 degrees or less, the energy of the water behaves in a way that it deposits sediment rather than eroding it. Also, I'd done some willow tree planting. I put saplings in, but of course, as soon as we had a flood, it washed them away. So he explained that if we coppiced the willow trees from around the farm, and buried them along the banks in the earth, they would act as root balls for fresh regrowth for the saplings. So our contractor looked at me like I had 2 heads when I said what I wanted to do. But basically, along some of our banks, we created, it looked a bit like a graveyard for willow trees. We we scraped it all back, and then we dug out the sort of graves, and we put whole trees, minus the brush, we left those. And what we've done was coppice, so where we've taken them from is regrowing, and it's actually really healthy regrowth now. And then the whole trunks that we buried, it's worked amazingly. We have got so much regrowth, and we didn't have to. One of the pictures shows you it's really green and lush. We didn't do any reseeding. That whole seed bank was in the earth or in the trunks of the trees. And the natural regeneration we've had has been amazing. There was one bank where we ran out of trees. I ran out of trees. I didn't have enough willow trees to bury, and it doesn't quite work with alder. So I got some trees from the Woodland Trust, planted them, and the earth around them just stayed bare. There was no seed bank that came with those trees, like what we had with the buried huge willow trees. So that's how we are addressing our bank erosion. I've taken fences back. I keep the livestock off the riverbanks. I keep sheep and goats, and then I have dairy heifers come in for the summer. Sheep and goats will eat everything on the riverbank, and then I had some of my worst erosion. I had no sort of green arm or infrastructure to protect them. So yeah, keep the livestock off. And another thing that I'm working on is creating a natural flood management project with, our biggest field, it's big for us, is 24 acres, and it sits on the wrong side of the river so that we can't get to it in winter. We're cut off, access is cut off by the river. So I thought, I had this mad idea that we could channel water out of the main river and into a basin, if we created a basin in this field, and then we were holding it back from town and helping to slow the flow. I'm not allowed to take water out of the main river. That's very much frowned upon by NRW. So what we're going to do is direct water from tributaries that run through the woodland that sit above the meadow, and we're going to direct the water, the overspill that we create, into a series of scrapes. A series of scrapes will work better than one whole big basin because it's a safe to fail approach. If one small scrape fails and leaks that water out, we're not letting go of a massive amount of water that's then going to rush downriver. So the scrapes will then feed into a basin of wet woodland that we're going to plant up, and then that will feed into a ditch, which will have a small bund. Basically, I started a crowdfunder so that I could afford to engage the local water engineers, so I could tap more people up for more advice. And then they have run with it with the local council and managed to get most of the funding from Welsh Government to complete the works. I'm still after a bit more funding, if anyone's interested, to help me finish off the classroom that I want to. I'm turning a bothy into a classroom, and also I need some help with funding a floodplain meadow seed mix as well. So yeah, it's been a real learning curve into the right tree in the right place and how habitat can build resilience into our farmland.
Very much, Sam. Our second speaker is James Robertson. Is an organic dairy farmer from South Cumbria, with huge experience of managing a farming business which is productive and works with nature at the same time. James, I think you're 2 or 3 days into being the chair of NFFN 24, aren't you, for England? So welcome to the chair. Thanks, James.
Are we getting any pictures?
I
just because I think you've all seen them all anyways, to be honest. I'll do them first. Because I kind of need the before and afters, but anyway, we'll go with what we've got. So yeah, hi, James Robinson from Strictly. It would have been good to have some pictures, but I will do my best. But yeah, so we farm up in Cumbria, South Cumbria, near Kendal. Oxenholme railway station is like about a mile away. So as you roll through there on the train when you're heading up to Edinburgh or whatever. Oh, we've got a picture. That's good. Right, so yeah, if you just keep clicking through them a little bit, on to the next one. There we go. Right, so this is a kind of, well, that shows our back there. So we're in an area that is 99% grassland, very little cropping at all where we are. We're in the upper catchment, or the upper third of the catchment for our beck. So if you just stop on that one a minute, if you can. And it's an interesting spot to farm. So we're in an area that is sort of dominated by these drumlins. And if any of you can remember drumlins from your GCSE geography days, that's probably the last time you heard the word. They're quite a sort of, it's a glacial formed landscape, and they're quite a sort of steep-sided hill with a soily top and then a wet flat bit in the bottom where all the river and the water tends to run. It's a bit like Hobbiton, to be honest. If you just imagine Hobbiton, then that's where we are. But it's a managed landscape. All the becks are all managed, so they've all been straightened over the last probably 400 or 500 years. They've sort of suffered from over-management as well, which means that we've got these, in a lot of places, and I haven't got a picture of it, we've got these elevated, canalised becks on some of our farm. So it's where they've sort of been cleaned out, and you end up with a banking and a beck that is essentially higher than a lot of the land around it. So it's a bit rubbish in terms of water flow and for ecology and for flood mitigation and everything. We're quite lucky though that we've got all these sort of flat areas around as well. So we've done a bit of planting and stuff on there, but that'll be the next slide hopefully. Go back. Thank you. So 300 acres we're all owned. We've been organic for getting on 20 years now, actually. We're in dairy short owned, so we're in a native breed. We graze for a long time, so we're grazing from mid-March, some years, probably 4 years out of 5, mid-March, and then they're inside from like beginning of November. We've been using stewardship schemes for a long time, so we see them as really part of our business. Is this going to work? And then we've used them in terms of like hedgerow restoration and stuff like that. But then also, as the schemes have gone on, we've used them for management, for a lot of land management as well. We're organic, like I say, so our milk, the majority of our milk is going to yew tree, which ends up in like pret-a-manger and stuff. So if you go in there, some of that milk could potentially be ours. But then we're also, a local artisan cheesemaker has approached us over the last couple of years, and we've been making some cheese, which is called, one of them is called St. Sundays, which is named after this beck that flows through. So I'll now skip to the next one. So I thought I'd just show you with some of the actions that we do on the farm to sort of enhance the habitat, mitigate flooding, bring in income for the farm as well, but then also help with the management of the wider farm as well. So this is what we're doing. It was only about a month ago now. A horrible wet day. It was a hideously wet day. We put the call out on social media for some volunteers. I think we got about 15 volunteers come, some local, some from all over. If you want to get people to plant trees, they will come, whatever the weather. People just love getting involved and doing stuff. And it's a fantastic sort of community thing to do as well. You know, people want to plant something that is, they want to help create something that is going to be there for the future. So this wood pasture that we've put in about 85 individual trees, like the bigger trees, over about 10 acre. See, this is what happens, it just skips them there. Right. See that there, there's an individual tree with a great group, tall tree garden, and then there's 3 smaller ones around the outside of it. So we've put in like 1 big standard tree, 3 small ones, and then we've actually put in a cactus tree guard around those, if people have seen those cactus spiky tree guards. The reason is we've put the 3 around that single one is so once the cactus tree guard is removed, that those 3 scrubby species will be protecting that single one. And Pete will tell you can't get them 3 trees close enough. They want to be as close as they can, don't they? I have to keep telling people to put them closer. But it was a really good day. We got in all the trees. So we've done about 10 acres of this wood pasture. And that wood pasture is going to benefit us as a farmer. It's going to benefit our cattle for shade, both in sun and rain. So it was said this morning at a veterinary sustainability one that we're going to get increased temperatures, obviously, in the next, by 2050. Cattle are going to need a lot more shade. So we're going to be planting trees now. It's going to be nice and shady in 25 years' time. And then also, there's browse as well. So we're putting a lot of species, such as willow and aspen and stuff like that. That's, it's really good for browse as well. But we've put in a lot of flowering species. So we've put in cherries, so bird cherry, wild cherry, crab apples. And then we've also put some bigger sort of standard trees like your oak, beech, hornbeam, that type of thing, just to create those trees that are going to be our future veteran and ancient trees, because we need to get them in now. Best time to plant the trees 20 years ago, as you know. So what we've also done is a bit of beck wiggling. James Rebanks coined the term re-wiggling and stuff. I think now it's used by ecologists even, even though they probably hate it. But it kind of does exactly what it says. So on the left-hand side there, that was just after we'd done it. Typical me, I never got any pictures of anything taken before we'd started. But if you see, the beck used to run down pretty much just to the right of all that digging work in a straightened line. So it had been straightened probably hundreds of years ago. The right-hand side of that beck was the neighbours, or is the neighbours, so we can't touch that. The left-hand side there, very flat, level area, about 18 inch of fall, I think, from the top end right to the bottom. So we wanted to do something in there. I didn't want to go down the route of going through a stewardship scheme, getting all permissions, getting 3 quotes, because as an individual farmer, that is like a nightmare from start to finish. So what we did, Environment Agency were doing some work through Danny Teasdale from Ullswater CIC. I knew him anyways. I asked him to come over Shap, which if you're in Cumbria, it's a big thing if you're heading over Shap. He did head over Shap. He's done this work for us from start to finish. So basically, he did all the surveying, he got all the permissions, he even sat on the digger and did all that work. And within a week, he'd taken water from the right-hand side of that picture and then wiggled it all the way through the bottom. He's created some scrapes, he's created some pond areas, and within a week of him finishing, there was 3 different species of dragonfly laying their eggs in the water that was there. So it's just amazing how fast stuff comes. That was taken a year after, when there was you know, some more dragonflies coming on. Those original ones are now starting to hatch, and they will do for the next couple of years. Some of them are like 4-year cycles, I think, for dragonflies. So the amount of life there is on there is just absolutely phenomenal. Then we get the extra bird life as well. So we've got two lots of reed bunting on there. We've even got nesting, summer nesting snipe. So we always get wintering snipe on that sort of area, we always have. But this time we've actually had a pair nesting on there, which is pretty cool. And it's just a fantastic area, and there's always water running through that now. So there's always water, there's always standing water. Even if it really, really dries up and there's only a little trickle, there's all that mud there as well. We've done a little bit of planting in there, but only had little bits of willow and stuff. And we're going to keep that minimal because we want to be able to have some nesting birds and things on there. But we're going to plant some bigger trees at the ends and stuff. But we want that centre bit to be as fit for ground nesting birds as possible. A few minutes left. Right, okay. So we've got, another thing we did down in Teesdale is we fenced off a lot of becks. So this left-hand side of the beck there, it was a canalised thing from probably like the 50s or 60s. And then a year later, once it's been fenced off, you see the amount of growth there is in there. But not just that, there's probably about the same amount of water level in there, or the water flow down there, but the water level is much more increased by allowing that whitewater crowfoot to develop and to grow, because it's very sort of, it's fixed to the stones with only very shallow, delicate roots and things, which is kind of how it spreads down streams and stuff. But cattle going into that beck disturb it, and they end up destroying that habitat. So on the right-hand side picture, that is pretty much the same flow as the left, but it's just all held back by that depth of the whitewater crowfoot. So we've been able to do that by fencing off the beck. We've been able to do that with these solar-powered water pumps. So we've installed 2 of those systems, one around this bottom end and then one around the top end of the farm as well. And they've worked wonders for us. You see all the whitewater crowfoot flowering in the middle of that beck there, and that is just phenomenal to see. It's an absolute picture. But we've got the dairy farm right next door to that, the dairy herd right next door to that, and that is with water provided from these solar-powered pumps. And it's enabled us to change the way we manage the farm by taking the water to the cows rather than the cows to the water. Call this bit Danny's beck because on the left-hand side there is a new beck that Danny dug. So that was a year after he dug it through. It's a bit hard to see on this right-hand side picture, but there's a big pond on the left-hand side. It was created probably 30 years ago. There's an ancient oak woodland on the right-hand side, but all that bit around the pond and the bit through the middle and where Danny's dug his new little beck, that is all now, I'm going to skip forward, that is all now looking like that left-hand side one, whereas it used to look like this right-hand side one. That's the same person in the picture, by the way. Put on a bit of, yeah. But yeah, so that little guy there, that was mid-1980s, that one there. And then, so within a generation, you can get that sort of growth there. So we've actually created a bit of Celtic rainforest within that. You know, there's these just masses of ferns and lugworts and things growing off all the trees in there, so it's absolutely fantastic. It's always damp in there. So there's that there. In behind me, there's that big pond. And that little guy there, I used to love messing about in becks all my childhood. I would just piss about in becks all my life. I just loved it. And every school holiday, I was picking up stones, looking at the stones, loving all the stuff that was living in the beck. And I had, and I would have loved to see things like kingfishers and like otters and stuff like that, both of which we've now got on the beck. In fact, where I was stood, I'm hoping this is going to play, that is an otter that was basically stood where that little boy was stood before, that me, when I was 8, 10. And this otter is there. Is it going to play? There we go. Technology here. So it's basically a mother and a young otter catching a crayfish, native white-clawed crayfish, and then, picking it out for it to eat there. And there's stuff like that happening on our beck, and there's stuff like that happening by better management of rivers and waterways. And if farmers can clean things up to allow things like otters to thrive, then we can do pretty much anything.
It feels awful hurrying people up. And I'm sorry about that, but I do want to get to the questions at the end, and we've still got 2 more speakers. So, next one, Nick Chappell from Lancaster University. We first met just after Storm Desmond in 2015, And since then, Nick has run a project called QNFM, Quantifying Natural Flood Management, with a tiny bit of input from yours truly. And a lot of that was based on the fact that the modelling used by Environment Agency and others didn't contain specific data from even the north of England, let alone Cumbria, where we're using those models. So Nick set out to try and prove the data behind natural flood management, taking a peek down, and he's an amazing man with data. He's put my head into a spin on too many occasions. Anyway, Nick Chappell, thank you very much.
This opportunity to share some of our recent research funded by the Natural Environment Research Council and also Environment Agency. And as Peter's explained, what we've tried to do is quantify how different types of NFM can reduce flood peaks, a nature-based solution. So we've categorized those interventions by the processes that are being changed into 6 or 5 different processes, and I'll explain those in detail in a moment, but I'd first like to explain our 2 core approaches, because I want you to believe that what we're doing is scientifically credible. So first of all, we have a lot of measurements undertaken at a scale of about 1 kilometre squared, if I can fight with this system. And as you see, most of those measurements are Cumbria focused. Primarily those are on farmed grasslands, also some woodlands, but some out with Cumbria. And those are defined by these trapezoidal gauging structures. Getting really accurate discharge is fundamental to assurance of the reliability of our conclusions. And the interventions that take place at that scale have not been built by us at all. It's been constructed, added to the landscape by all of our wonderful partners, including the Woodlands Trust. And we've tried to look at all of those 5 different interventions across the network of those catchments. But from the outset, we were asked to look at how NFM could work at much larger scales. 200 kilometres squared, 2,000 kilometres squared of the whole Eden catchment, for example. And to do that, we've needed to upscale those local measurements. Now, to do that, to be credible, we've modelled, first of all, real data. We've modelled real floods in Cumbria. We've had to accept uncertainty in catchment models, which has meant we've run our models 10,000 times on our supercomputer to get the baseline simulations. We've then thrown an awful lot of those simulations out as not scientifically credible, leaving us in that small example there of only 67, to which we then apply a particular NFM intervention to see how that would scale up, based upon direct observations. So what you really want are some of the results. So going through each of those 5 types of intervention, very, very briefly, given the time. So first of all, people told us, this has a mind of its own, this little thing, which is fun, that trees, particularly deciduous trees with no leaves in winter, don't do anything in major flood events. We questioned that. We went back to raw data. We looked at raw data. These are daily events. The size of Storm Desmond, those values are not 0. And this is deciduous trees, very often without leaves. Why not? Because the atmosphere, this is relative humidity, through an enormous event like Storm Desmond, was not at 100%. Where it wouldn't work, you've got 5 or 10% capacity. That's how it works. The trees throw the water back in the atmosphere through the event. What does that mean in terms of a catchment? That's a rather psychedelic diagram. Sorry about that. That is the Derwent catchment. You have Cockermouth over here, for example. You are getting substantial amounts of water thrown back out of the system during events as large as Storm Desmond. This can work in the right places with the right meteorological conditions. We then looked at storing water on hill slopes with bunds, with walls, with wooden structures. The key issue here is the timing. If you hold the water only for minutes, it won't work. If you hold the water for days, it won't work. There's a sweet spot in the middle of a few hours where you get the maximum benefit in terms of your flood mitigation. So this is where we took this work to the Kent catchment, 200 kilometres squared. If I'd showed you the interventions in the Kent, you wouldn't see them. So this is just 15 kilometres squared. Those little dots are all the structures in the system where they're designed to work like real places. This is Birds Park near to Kendal. We could take you to see that. So this is the key result. Now that's rather complicated in that there's 134 lines on that plot. It's quite hard to interpret. So if you look at the upper plot, if it's just about visible, what you can see around the flood peak, we are getting reductions in the flood peak for a 1 in 5 year event. This is actually Storm Abigail, if some of you remember that. And measurable reductions in the flood peak. This is Desmond, so we're even getting changes in Storm Desmond. Smaller reductions occurring a little ahead of the peak, but you're still getting these effects in very large events. We've also looked at enhancing the soil permeability, and initially that was about planting trees opening up the soil, enhancing the permeability. But of course, they're also drying out the soil. So the soils are drier at the start of these very large events. So that we needed to incorporate within the modelling. And these are direct observations in Cumbria. So the models are all scaled against those observations. Now, as we were doing this work, we started to think, well, maybe grasslands and changes to grasslands might also have a benefit. So we started looking at aeration. How does aeration alter the permeability? So we've published the work already on blade aeration. These are some of the results that we have from sward lifting. And I was quite surprised in that with the sward lifting, we were getting comparable rates of permeability enhancement as we were with the trees. So it's effectively something comparable. We put that set of results through the same model for the same data, so I'm showing you for the same place. We are getting reductions around the flood peak. In some cases, we're actually getting some negative results. We're actually getting higher flood peaks, but that's all explainable by the processes. But there are changes associated with changing the soil. But I did get a little bit worried about the sustainability of some of the sward lifting when we saw that some of the farmers, after they'd driven their big heavy tractor across the land, closed up the slits simply for cutting slides. So we have started on some work on permeability change and mob grazing. That's ongoing. So the penultimate intervention that we've looked at is holding water in channels, which is most people's thought of NFM. And what we see is that it's really quite hard to get the right amount of volume in the landscape by trying to hold water in a channel, particularly with steep Cumbrian mountain streams. Where they really work is if you, as with this particular dam, can throw the water onto the surrounding land and make it difficult for the water to get back into the stream. So you're holding it on those soils. The last of our interventions, and by no means least, is manipulating the floodplain. Can we make our floodplains work harder during these really large flood events that flood our homes downstream? So this is an example from Grange over Sands, where we have the data. This is a 1 in 1 year event, and we have a reduction in the flood peak from 1 or 2 interventions, mostly storing water better on the floodplain. So there it is in numbers. The reality is the measurements we took for several years before the interventions, these people were getting flooded twice per year, water in their homes. After the intervention, we've had 2 years, they've not had water in the homes, and this structure says we've had similarly sized events. So my last slide is my summary slide. So what do we learn from this? Well, people questioned whether NFM could actually work 5 years ago when we started this research. We now have as others have, it's not just us working on this at Lancaster, evidence places where it is working. You could take a farmer, you can take a minister and show them it is working. But we have to design those features to work. We have to put the right amount of intensity in the landscape, and very often we actually have to start stacking the interventions in the system to get an effective amount of storage in there to deliver what we need to reduce the flood peaks. So that's me. Thank you.
That is a PhD's worth of material in 10 minutes flat. So anyone wanting a PhD after this, just reiterate that and we'll be away. So our fourth speaker is Alex Adam, and he is the head of water stewardship at the Rivers Trusts. This is the national body which supports its local members. There's 65 different trusts that sit under that umbrella. Alex is going to talk through an exemplar project and provide us with some options for action. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you, Pete. Hello, can you all hear me? Firstly, I feel like I'm standing on the shoulder of giants, so thanks to Sam, James and Nick for actually the amazing work they're doing on the ground. I feel like a bit of a fraud. And now we're going to try and see if we can get this to work. Okay. So I'm going to talk about Resilient Glendamachin, which is primarily about an NFM project. I don't like the word project. There's too many projects in this sector. We should be doing programs and what have you. But anyway, it's a project that we're dealing with, focused on NFM, but it's ultimately about building a resilient catchment. But first of all, I'm just going to quickly talk through what we do as the Rivers Trust and how we work. We're all about happy, healthy rivers valued by all, but to do that, you've got to work at a catchment scale. We don't own any land, so we have to work in collaboration. Everybody has to work together to get the rivers fixed. And we know our rivers are in a pretty parlous state. There's either too much water, as we're talking about today, too little water, as we had in the summer, or it's too dirty. All those issues affect everybody. And actually, I describe water as the currency of natural capital, which I know it sounds really sexy, but it's the one thing that actually starts to bring all these different ecosystem services together, because people talk about carbon, talk about biodiversity, talk about nutrient neutrality. We need to look at this as a collective in the round. So, water is the currency of natural capital. It's also the currency in social capital, because if people can't get water to drink, that means businesses get damaged. If people are getting flooded, the devastation. So if we start to think through the lens of water and at catchment scale, we can generally build resilience and address many of the issues we've got through climate change and nature depletion. Anyway, so one of the issues that one of the programs of work that we are working on, it's building on all the really good stuff that's happening already, all the evidence base, is looking at trying to reduce flooding in Keswick. And I'm sure there's probably people here who are very familiar with Keswick. Keswick floods quite a lot. There's been a lot of money that's been spent in Keswick in terms of EA flood risk management, pouring concrete, glass, everything. And I think the flood works were basically to reduce 150-year floods. I think there's been three floods in Keswick since those works have been put in place. So, oh, and that's where Pete lives, just for the avoidance of doubt. Right, anyway, so Pete will tell you about the wider issues. But Keswick floods, and it's flooding more and more frequently. And we could carry on pouring concrete, but financially it doesn't make sense. I don't think there's even the space to do it in Keswick. So we have to look at nature-based solutions. We also have much wider issues in terms of carbon, so on and so forth, that we need to. How can we bring all these different things together? The catchments, unfavourable SAC, loss of biodiversity, poor water quality, as well as flooding. Glendamachin catchment, so this is where the project that we are looking to do, or I say we, it's actually West Cumbria Rivers Trust, with support from ourselves. We're looking at putting in various interventions, the types of things that Nick has talked through, and Sam and James will be proving, at a scale across the catchment to have a noticeable benefit in terms of flooding, as well as improving water quality, reducing the quantity, carbon sequestration. So if anybody in this room is into tree planting and government targets around tree planting, planting a tree in this country is arguably the hardest thing you're ever going to do. Okay? It's, if there's anybody here who's actually really tried to do tree planting at scale, and Chris has been working with Chris because we're trying to do lots of tree planting across all the rivers in the UK, it's really, really difficult. Habitat creation, biodiversity, socioeconomic. So we know if we can get all these things right, we're delivering multiple benefits to multiple people. And the way we're going to do that is through all these different interventions, many of which can already work with the farming system, but they all rely on working with the land managers and often rewarding the land managers to change their land use, to improve and include these types of interventions on their land. And as we all know, every single one of those has multiple different benefits. The aesthetics, carbon, water quality, so on and so forth. So this is a project that West Cumbria have been working on for quite a long time. It started off through one of the Countryside Stewardship Facilitation Funds. So there was a group of farmers that the local trust were working with. That fund, Countryside Stewardship Facilitation, stopped. United Utilities, the water company, have actually stepped up into that space to provide funding to that catchment group. And through that group of farmers, working with the local trust and doing the hydrological modelling, that's what we've delivered thus far, which is great, doing lots of good things. But there's much more scope to do much more, and which is what we want to do. So we want to reduce the peak flow going into Keswick by 13% in a 1 in 30-year flood. And we could do that because we've done the modelling. I would say we did it. It's quite complicated to do, but thanks to the likes of Nick and all the science around it, it can be done now. We then want to put in 900,000 cubic metres of interventions to store that water in the right places in the right way in the catchment to reduce the flooding. But in order to do that, we're going to have to find £8 to £10 million of private investment, and over and above, or in addition to, or actually, let's rephrase that. Agri-environment schemes are not the solution to all our ills. They are very limited. So how do we find the money to pay for this, or find the money to pay the landowners to do this? So one of the things that we've done is worked through a relatively financial model. This is based on some work we've already done through the Wire NFM scheme, which is a natural flood risk management project. Much smaller scale. It was only 70 properties that we were looking to prevent from flooding. If anybody is interested in the detail of how that worked and wants more insight around this, go to the Green Finance Institute website, and there is a very, very detailed case study of about 25 pages for anyone who's interested in. But basically, we set up a SPV, Special Purpose Vehicle, based in the community, based in the catchment, with the buyers and sellers. So the landowners, land managers sit on that group, plus the buyers. So there's a group there, a vehicle for blending the money. We've identified the sellers, most of whom are farmers, and the buyers. Now, the buyers are an interesting bunch because that could be the water company, highways, local authority, all these people who are benefiting from the flood risk mitigation. And by pooling their money together to pay for the land use change that we need to see farmers adopt, we're developing this circular model. And the really, really good thing about it is it's based on social enterprise principles. So any profit that ever gets made gets ploughed back into making the catchment more resilient. It's good, isn't it? So this is what we are going to do. So this project has recently been successfully applied for a landscape recovery. So we are, I think it's fair to say, pretty much further down the line. We're looking to start implementation in earnest by May 2025. But we've already probably going to be doing some work prior to that in actual terms of delivering the interventions. We're quite a long way in terms of securing the funding. Not completely there, but we will be there shortly. And through that funding, we are delivering, or the landowners in the catchment will be paid to deliver all these different interventions that will reduce flooding, improve water quality, and benefit biodiversity. And that's me.
Thank you very much. I truly agree. 4 very passionate, good speakers. So thanks very much indeed. We are here, but we're also online as well. So when we have the questions, are we looking at Andy? Just one? Oh, just one. Okay. So we'll go to the floor for a couple and then we'll come to you. Is that best? Okay. No, I'm hoping, is this going to work as well? So, sound man at the back. Right. Can you, when you ask your question, can you be clear, concise, give your name, and a short question? And if I just go, let's go, oh, Chris. I'm going to leave Chris later on, purposefully. Let's go in here first.
Diolch Tom Johnson ydw i. Tom Johnson, I work for the National Parks and Bees in Wales. I'm particularly interested on the views from the farmers, but not to exclude the other two as well. You're welcome to chip in. I'm just interested to hear your thoughts on what the main hurdles and barriers are that you face employing some of these techniques on your land at the moment.
Yeah, can you hear? Yeah. So for me, the main barrier has been trying to get investment to help me get these projects underway. We've had to self-fund most of the work ourselves. So yeah, I think I don't get the impression that it's a problem so much on this side of the border, but in Wales it's definitely been funding. And NRW, getting them on board, I think it made their heads spin that there was a landowner who wanted to deliver a solution, workable solution. They were a bit like, oh no, this wasn't meant to happen, they weren't meant. So licensing has been a bit of a problem, but thankfully raised enough money through the crowdfunder to employ the professionals to deal with that.
I think for us, the barriers, we're lucky that we had Danny Teasdale through his Ullswater CIC to be able to do the one big project that we wanted to do. If I'd looked at it previously, but that was through stewardship schemes, and yeah, it made my head spin, really, just with the permissions and the quotes. You know, if you try and get 3 people to do a quote for that sort of digging work, it's nigh impossible, you know, because no one wants to do that sort of stuff.
And this is a rural problem, is it? Rural skills.
It is. I mean, yeah. I mean, and also the work that Danny Teasdale did, which included all the fencing and that water pump and digging a new beck. There's actually 2 areas of that beck wiggling as well. One 3 mile further up the catchment that he did for us. The work that he did, the invoice that he put into the Environment Agency was the same as what it would have been to get a feasibility study done.
Yeah.
You know, so he did all the work, all the practical work, all the capital stuff, and it was the same as what a feasibility study would have been for one person just to come in and do it. So, in pound for pound spend, you know, that makes sense to do it that way.
There's now a saying in Cumbria that we need a Danny in every valley. So the next question is going to come down here.
Thank you very much. Denise Walton, farmer from southern Scotland. Nick, I think you mentioned in passing that the sort of mob grazing, and my interest in this question is my involvement in the pasture fly association. I mean, also pasture fly farmers. What is the role of grassland management and grazing on the holding capacity of soil of water? So the relationship between grazing and flooding.
So,
thank you.
As I noted, the work on mob grazing started really when I was just concerned to see this loss of permeability associated with the sward lifting. And I thought, well, I'll just go to the global literature. But I came up with nothing that I could really use. I didn't really want to start measuring changes in soil permeability associated with mob grazing. So we've started, and I need to accelerate that. And I'm only doing that because I couldn't find the data. And obviously, the mob grazing is the grass, the roots allowed to grow deeper that are opening up the soils. And we have some examples that actually show that works. In terms of what we are focused on, we're focused on the flow of water, the movement of water into the soil. That's our primary objective in terms of flood mitigation. But of course, there are other aspects to that water system of the water maintenance in those soils throughout the summer months. And we have noticed anecdotally with some of our farming partners that they're seeing the soils aren't drying out as rapidly in the summer months with the mob grazed system. So we will try and measure the water content. So it is about storage as well in terms of maintaining the sward through the summer. But for us, primarily, we're interested in the infiltration, the loss from the surface.
Thanks, Nick. We're going to take an online question from Andy down here.
Online question from Frida Scott Park. It's a good question, I have to say. A controversial question for the panel. Where does the panel stand on the role of beavers in natural flood management?
I think that preempts Chris. So, am I right? Am I right? Does that preempt your question, Chris? Because you might add to the question, partly. Okay, we'll come back to that then. Beavers. Do you want, Alex? Do you want to crack?
Yeah, I think right beaver, right place. First of all, because they're economically they make an awful lot of sense, particularly if you don't have to put in quite so much fencing. I know there's the current approach is perhaps overly draconian on the fencing. Chris could probably offer some thoughts on that one as well. But there's a lot of time and effort goes into building leaky dams. Whereas actually we could just let some beavers go out and do it on our behalf. But it does have to be. But the really important thing with beavers, and we know that in Scotland there are, they've gone wild now, and it's causing some real tensions with landowners. So I say the right beaver, right place, but I do think they need to be welcomed, because actually if they're not, I think that might have wider negative consequences elsewhere.
Which is perfect to bring Chris. Can you add to that, Chris, please? This is Chris Jones' Cornish Beaver Project.
There are beavers living quite happily now in at least 15 rivers in England. One of those places, the Scottish government, in fact, actually said, yes, we're going to put some beavers there. The rest have all occurred through escapes and, if you like, unofficial releasing. Why is there only one river where there's an absolute war with beavers? It's because that river has got very large floodplains of very fertile soil with a river perched above it. So the beavers just coming doing normal beaver stuff, break down flood banks, and then someone's crop of carrots gets flooded. We need to have a strategy for bringing these animals back. There is nothing that approaches beavers for their ability to build dams in headwaters that will make our efforts at woody debris dams look pathetic, and they do. There's just nothing like it at all. Mainly because without overtime pay, they're out fixing them when they have any sort of damage in the night. With our little project, we've gone from a passage of a flood peak through 200 metres. Before the beavers came, it was about 10 to 15 minutes. Now it's nearly 2 hours for a flood peak just to progress through there. And there's no sensible reason why that couldn't be in probably 3/4 of the rivers of this country. What we have to do is have a strategy which avoids those places where there'll be real conflict, and it is real conflict with high-value agriculture. And it would be really easy to have a management system which needn't cost a lot of money. Other countries do it just fine, if we want it to. Like I say, they're out on at least 15 rivers now, and coming to a river near you quite soon, probably.
Thank you very much. I know there's a question over here that's been very patient, and then we'll come to you after this one. So.
Hi, yes, Dominic Woodfield. I'm an environmental consultant. Here in the Thames Valley, and specifically here in Oxford, and this is probably a question for Nick more than anyone else, we're told by the Environment Agency that NFM doesn't really work in large lowland river catchments with high volume throughputs. I just wondered what your thoughts were on that, and particularly in relation to some of the figures that I saw in relation to sward lifting and aeration.
I think it's not fair to say it doesn't work. I think it is very fair to say if it's a groundwater flooding problem that you have, you are going to have to deal with biblical amounts of storage to deal with that. Of course, you could cover the whole landscape with trees, and you would substantially lose a lot of that water, but then this is very productive soil. We can't cover the whole landscape with trees. You are then really left with the substantial option of dealing with the water once it's come out of the ground. But you are talking about huge amounts of water coming out of chalk systems. So you could still have naturalistic structures, you could have wetlands and so on, but it's the amount of water that you would need to use. You would probably need to exceed that 10,000 meters cube of storage per intervention, where you then get into Reservoirs Act and so on. Within the current Environment Agency programme called FCRIP, the £200 million programme, we are having to think about going beyond 10,000 metres cubed of storage in any one location or a series of locations to deliver the flood mitigation for communities that are only downstream of 20 kilometres squared. So sometimes we have to think outside the box. So NFM is really about effective storage. You can be infiltrating the water, you can be evaporating it, but it's equivalent to storage in these very big events. And it is much more difficult, I think, when you come to these big chalk catchments with groundwater flooding. But we can't give up on those areas.
Should we not just solve climate change?
A related question. I'm Steve Newman from Biodiversity International. We're doing projects of nature-based solution at $1 billion scales in different countries. So it's a strategic question which related to a few throwaway comments made by the panel saying that agri-environment schemes are not enough to deal with some of this. So if we imagine over the next 10 years major flood events, and let's define them as ones that are going to cost about £1 million to resolve, to compensate. Where's the vision in three possible approaches, which is the most important things that we think about? Firstly, there is what we're talking about today, which is farmers working together with agri-environment schemes. That's one possible solution. The middle one is farmers and other actors working together with novel financing mechanisms. And the third ones are the big ones, which need big, hard, heavy engineering approaches, which in any case, these days, they don't exclude bioengineering and nature-based solutions. What we're finding in different countries is we use a hybrid. We use both hard, as a fail-safe. So can you give any steerage, looking into the future over the next 10 years, what emphasis should we place on those three different scales?
Alex.
Yeah, it's a really interesting characterisation that you've put them into three. Yeah. And therein probably lies the problem, I would suggest, that actually we do look at it in isolation. What we really need is a coherent, in this, to my mind, is a really coherent geographical framework for the integration of policy, delivery and funding.
Yeah, I agree. So in a local area, that's what I'm just saying, that we're now looking at Great Britain as a whole, telling the politicians and the Treasury where we need to go. So you do need to do that at the local level, but we have to think about the future of the whole of Britain and citizens.
We do, but I would suggest that where we are currently in terms of governance, particularly just around water-related issues, and you look at all the different blobs and all the different projects and all the different entities and regulators, etc., it's mental. And people say there's not there's a shortage of money. I think actually if we brigaded the money that we already have, flood risk, agri-environment, water company money, etc., and actually use that more sensibly and put proper governance in at the right scale, we go a very long way to resolving a lot of the issues. And I think there is a real gap at the moment. There's what we call the missing middle in terms of governance at the moment, because we've got money for flooding, money for biodiversity, money for this, and never the twain shall meet. And the chaos, the bureaucracy on top of that, when it should actually be flowing to the land that change of land use, we're just wasting so much time and money.
Okay, next question. Can we, I'll come back to you in a minute. Just go over here. Nicola, what would you?
Hi, I'm Nick Renison, a farmer from Cumbria. Nick and Alex, I'm just getting a little bit of resistance from you about really simple solutions. So I live in Cumbria. Most of it is set stocked and overgrazed. And if we sorted that problem out, along with a few beavers, it would be much more straightforward and make a lot more financial sense. And I just get that you think the answer is possibly maybe a bit of kit or just very long-winded things when it's just set stocking is horrendous in the uplands, and that causes problems lower down. And I just wonder if you're fighting against the obvious.
I know both you, James, used to have sheep, didn't you? And you still have sheep. So the sheep question is one which I think keeps cropping up, particularly for me in the uplands. The sheep thing is there. It sits on my shoulder a lot. What's your response to that point?
Can I answer that, even though it was aimed at Nick? Is that all right? Yeah.
I think a farmer response would be welcome. We could come back to you, Nick, as well.
Yeah, I think there is obviously overgrazing in upland, well, upland and lowland areas. You know, I mean, it's the same where you are. Sheep are eating it into the wick, you know, as we would call it, which doesn't, yeah, it's just water's going to hit that and just run straight off. There is people now looking at bringing sheep off fells with payments that have helped them do that. So if the payments are there to reduce sheep numbers on the fells, create a bit of wood pasture in some lower areas of the fell, get cattle back on there, strategically grazing cattle, then there's a huge opportunity to do that on big areas. You know, we're not talking one field here and there, you know, we're talking hundreds of acres on fells and stuff. So if the payments are there and the support's there, I think it is already happening, and I think it's just a matter of time before it becomes much wider scale as well. Yeah, it is a tricky one because people have been breeding those sheep for hundreds of years and they don't want to stop, you know, and it's hard to tell them to change, but money talks, and if the money's there, I think they will change.
And just for context, something like 115,000 hectares of common in Cumbria. It's about 45% of the total common area in the UK, I think, is in Cumbria, and the tree cover and vegetation cover is really quite, well, it's very denuded.
But we must also respect the communities that are there that are doing it.
Absolutely.
And it's a very, you know, it's a fine line between telling them to do something and encouraging them to do something.
And this is one of the core debates, isn't it? Can we go to Sam next, and then Nick, please? Sam, what's your response on that? You know, a set stocking kind of question.
Well, I mob graze to improve my soils, and it helps during the dry spell, stockpiling that grazing. I would love to see more mob grazing happening in our catchment further up, but I wouldn't know where to start putting electric fencing out on rocky, hard, shallow soils. I have seen successful sort of mob grazing with cattle using electric collars. So then you haven't got the expense of fencing, the trickiness of putting out your electric fencing, and they can keep the cattle moving around uplands. So I don't know if perhaps less sheep set stocked and more cattle on the move in the uplands would help. But I don't want to get into that space where the lowlands are pointing at the uplands and the uplands are pointing at the lowlands.
We want to remove politics from this. Nick, what's your thoughts on that?
So I will always argue, obviously, that we do need robust scientific information and robust analysis, but we need that at a national scale. We need the evidence that can be relatable to people in this country. But I would never be the person who says every time we have a scheme, we need to employ a lot of modelers, people to come and do measurements and so on. There are some simple rules we can use so people can get on and build things that deliver to their objectives, whatever their objective is. Is it primarily going to be reducing flood risk? Is it going to be trying to improve water quality? Maybe somebody else is generating the issues upstream and we're trying to help, or restoring the ecology. So I think we can do an awful lot of that on the ground with people who know their land and know how to put things into their land if they have the support in their busy schedules to do that. But I do think we need the science elsewhere so that the results are generalizable and they're helpful in terms of people trying to come up with simple designs. What might work, what probably doesn't work.
And what works within the farm business as well.
Absolutely.
I know there's a question over here, but we have some online questions. Andy, can we go back to those?
This is an online question from Claire Lyons. The focus is often too much on the cost of projects. Has any estimates been done on the cost of no action or savings as a result of reduced floods, etc.? Thanks.
Is that an Alex?
I'm going to say yes, but I don't know the details. So a lot of the business cases that are not just Glendon-Mackin, but a lot of their kind of NFM type projects that are happening, that kind of the underpinning business case is it will save X amount of money to the community. Although within that, I think there's a lot of unknown costs about, emergency services. I'm a big fan of simplicity wherever we can get it. I really am. The fact of the matter is, these are generally complex problems and simple solutions are very often not always right. So actually getting that full costings of some of these flood project damage is actually really difficult. But I can't quote exact figures now, I'm afraid.
Should we take another quick online question?
So from the first presentation, there was a mention of the advantages of 30-degree riverbanks or field slope affecting silt deposition. Could this be expanded on a little bit?
Yeah, so what I had was a vertical edge where the maize was being grown, being ploughed right up to the edge, maize grown, and then the river was acting erosively along the bottom of that vertical edge, and then of course there was no stabilisation in the top, so when you had a flood event, the whole lot fell in, hence why I lost such a big margin off the edge. So we did sort of simple, what it says on the tin, we got an excavator in and scraped the soil back into the field to create that slope so that the water can then deposit what it's carrying, so all the sediment, rather than taking the land away into town and out to sea. I had to trust the scientist that he knew what he was talking about, the geomorphologist, when he talked about numbers and degrees and that. But I can get a digger driver to do as I ask, even if he thinks I'm nuts. And we did it, and it worked, and it has worked. I can't believe it, but it has, and anyone is welcome to come and have a look and see.
Great, thanks.
I think you're a vet, aren't you?
Thanks, Pete. Masquerading, I'm actually working on a landscape recovery project, working in the River Axe down south. But I guess two things on the money thing. If I was looking for money, I'd put James and Sam up in front of whoever want money off, and we'd get that money. But on that, as a note of what's been said, I've been involved in projects that were started prior to me taking this job, but with all the modelling that had been done prior, you then look at the cost of doing the intervention, get the farmer to do it, it's probably 30 to 40 grand, maybe using brash that they're pulling from within the catchment. Get the contractors in, the kind of professional guys, we're talking 300,000. So there goes, when you start looking down, farmers have the solution, farmers have the skills, farmers are the best problem solvers out there. You give them the problem, tell them what you want to do, and I bet you farmers can fix it. So in terms of money, I think always go and ask the farmer what he would do, and you're more likely you'll get a more cost-effective solution. Was there a question? Yeah, a lead on would be on a catchment basis. How do we get farmers to work in like a catchment-based? How do we get James to work with his neighbour and his neighbour so you end up with this catchment-scale solutions? What are the barriers to that?
Yeah, how do I get my neighbours to work with me? We some will, some won't. There's good people on our catchment, and there's those that just want to keep doing what they're doing, and that's fine. You don't want to. You can't tell farmers what to do. It just doesn't work, does it? But you can show them what works on your farm, and you can show them how it's change the management of your farm for the better. Like I say, so we're fencing off the becks and things, and allowing the riparian strips to grow up. But we've changed the management of the way we water the cows, the way we can graze the cows because of that. So if you can show them a positive solution of how you approach things, and that it's benefited your business, benefited your management of the cattle, then they will get on board and stuff. And with the work that we've done, especially like the wiggling the beck and stuff like that, 2 neighbours, neither of which I thought would ask. Both of them are wanting to do something on areas of their land now as well. So it's just by sort of, not leading by example, that's a bit arsey, isn't it? But it's more just like, you know, doing what you think is right, showing them that it can be done, and then people start working together. And there's clusters and stuff now, isn't that are doing, you know, some of the clusters there. It's still a nightmare to set up a cluster through DEFRA. We looked at doing it on our catchment, and even though they've made it more simple, it is still nigh impossible. So if there is some sort of more localised funding, stuff like if there's a wind farm or something nearby, or a solar plant or something like that, they quite often have community funding. That sort of thing might go towards setting up the a cluster rather than going through government again, and just getting farmers together, because farmers love being nosy, looking over neighbour's hedge, looking at what's happening on farm, and so you can easily get farmers around to look once you've done the job.
I think the use of the word exemplar is important, isn't it? Because we do need exemplars, and I think the last 10 years for me has been a space where we've now got rewilding, or we've got mob grazing, or we've got farmers putting hedgerows back or whatever, and I think the exemplars are absolutely critical. It's how you access them and what you, and the language around them, isn't it? It's not showing somebody how to do something, it's showing what can happen if you do something.
Yeah, I can use the example of Danny Teasdale again. So the work that he's done, he's never had to advertise the work. So he's basically done good stuff at a farmer-based level. He's worked with farmers to make sure it works for them, and then for the environment, and for flood mitigation, or whatever. And then it's word of mouth. People have come in, and there's other people setting up CICs because of the work that he's done. So yeah, you need people to stick their heads up and get on and do stuff sometimes.
Sam, you wanted to make a point?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to build this classroom, so I feel like I should have a bit of input here.
Do you need some more funding for it?
Yeah, please. One of the things that's sort of gaining interest in what we're doing is actually the dry summers. So it's kind of creating that mindset shift that we need. I couldn't ask a farmer uphill from me to please flood your land without, I would expect some reimbursement for that myself. But when you've got, like, the hills are drying out so quick during these hot spells and these droughty spells, that's actually sort of getting that mindset shift happening. But then they're sort of thinking, well, maybe the odd pond or deeper rooting lays, and it's like looking at the net benefits, not just the holding the water back for the sake of holding water back. I think that's what's creating traction.
There's a question here, and then I think we'll take an online one. Have you got another one, Danny? No? Okay, we'll come to you next.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon. Martin Howlett. I'm a farmer and chairman of the Tamar Valley National Landscape, as we're now called. And I firstly help answer the question that we've just had before I ask my own question. It is very much about farm clusters, and we were beneficial in our own area in the Tamar Valley. That's the River Tamar between the Devon and Cornwall border, where we were able to have funding from WEEF. I know we've mentioned NERF up there, but WEEF was Water Investment Framework funding. That helped us in our catchment not only start to address the problems of very flash flooding, because it's a very short catchment straight into the main River Tamar, but through the benefit of the West Country Rivers Trust. I know you accidentally mentioned them earlier on in your part, Freudian slip, I'm sure, same initials, but they've really helped and brought together the farmers in the parish to form a farm cluster last year. We've been successful. One of the reasons why I'm here today also is with Carbon Net Zero Group, of which we'll have a film tomorrow on, highlighting the work that you can do when farmers come together. 22 farms in one parish. It was a struggle, as you've mentioned. DEFRA have this bizarre rule, you have to have a minimum of 5,000 hectares. That is fine if you're big arable farms, 4 or 5 farms, you've done it. 22 farms it took for us to get over the line. But by having that facilitation, that has really helped us to start to look at the way we farm, to look along with upstream thinking, other things to really help us to start to address the issues that are facing us all. And let's be honest, you know, it's farming rules for water, it's all the other things that are coming down the line that are there as a challenge, but we are, as the guy behind me just said, we are part of the solution and not just the problem. So we can work. So my question really was to look at the bigger picture, which was alluded to slightly earlier on. Where does the funding come from? Where does the strategy come from? As regards looking at water as the asset rather than the problem. You know, we have to remember climate change is coming down the road. We were told many years ago that the perfect storm by 2030 would be water depletion as well. Let's be honest, we see it in the dry summers. I'm from Cornwall. We've got a population of 500,000 people. That goes up to 5 million people when all the tourists come down. Thank you very much for coming to see us. But the water, that has meant that for the last 18 months, we've had a drought order on Cornwall, one of the wettest counties in the country, along with Cumbria, and yet the water is in the wrong place at the wrong time and is not being collected or distributed correctly. You know, you stick your reservoir on top of a moor rather than actually in the lower catchment where you actually can catch the water. It's that craziness. But getting the water across the country and our population of knocking on 8 million people is going to be the real, 80 million, start again, is going to be the real issue facing us all. We all, as landowners, are part of that solution, but we do need that investment and we do need a national framework. What would the comments be from the panel, please?
Just one of you, two of you. Sam?
I don't know, I often wonder if it would be worth investment from the insurance companies for all the payouts they must make on flooded homes. I just wonder if that would be somewhere to explore.
Pardon me? I think Aviva have been starting that, and I think the Co-op Bank have as well. So that is definitely one thing. Alex?
Yeah, you're right. We need a vision, we need a coherent policy framework, and we haven't had it. And it's, you know, short-termism, and this is not just the current government, this has been going on for 20, 30, 40 years. You know, money's been going out from the water companies. Whenever water companies say we need to put in infrastructure, they get told to reduce the cost. So this is a, it doesn't help, sorry, but this is a systemic issue, and it has been a problem for a very long time. I am actually very optimistic that the penny is beginning, or has begun to drop. I hope it's not too late. And absolutely, land managers are probably the biggest solution, part of that problem. And there is a real big opportunity. I really think there's a huge opportunity for land managers working together to tap into all these different sources of funding, diversifying income, not just the agri-environment schemes and the like, but there's a whole range of other investment funding, water company money, that is available or will start to flow in the fullness of time. Some of that will come from insurance companies, but actually they also make quite a lot of money out of people flooding. So it's, but they are beginning to move, but everything is moving too slowly.
I think we've got time for one more question. Before I get there, though, an hour and a half is a long time to sit on your bottom, so I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've all got something out of it. I hope you've all got some take-home things as well. Before we do, thanks for coming to Oxford Real. I think we need to thank the sound guy at the back. Hello, sound guy. They always get forgotten. And the... And the other, I can't see him, but there we go, wave at him. He does the other lighty things, so thank you very much. And to all the volunteers, we've got hosts of volunteers who are organising ourselves, and also Andy, thanks for taking the online questions, which is fantastic. So, our last question, thank you. And all the pressure's on you.
Yeah, sorry if it's a rubbish question. I work for the Seven Rivers Trust, and I'm just wondering about soil health and soil infiltration as an NFM method. And I know you briefly mentioned it before, but I recently went on a talk about weatherproofing farming, and this one chap really believed in the fact that if we improve soil infiltration, then we can basically try and stop a lot of flooding from the source. And I just wondered, you mentioned about mechanical infiltration trying to break into the ground, but I'm wondering, do you think that landowners and farmers might move towards sowing different seeds with different root lengths and things like that, and coming away from perennial rye, or do you think there'll be more focus on just mechanical interventions?
I'll add to that is, does that stacking help the farm business and biodiversity as well? Because I think that's the other thing that might benefit from that. But Nick, do you want to start on that one?
I think it's more an anecdotal comment that these interventions which are improving soil have been going on for 30 or 40 years. Mob grazing and so on has been around for a long while. Yet the scientific community don't seem to be engaged with that research. In my view, there's woefully little research involved in agriculture, associated with agriculture, particularly novel techniques. So while I'm not saying we need to hold things up while we get the research, I think we do need some parallel research programs along there to encourage other farmers to use these techniques, but also to persuade government that there should be the appropriate funding for these sorts of novel techniques. And government wants evidence. They don't want to build flood interventions unless there's evidence. Similarly, in terms of water quality improvement and so on. So I agree, a whole raft of techniques are really surrounding soil that we should be focusing on and developing and trying to persuade an awful lot more people to use. Because I see this community is really using these techniques, but there's that other community at that other meeting not using them at all, and I think we're really missing out.
The other meeting. The one we're all trying to ignore. So, James.
Yeah, I think with, I mean, it's obviously seen like a well-managed permanent pasture. The water will infiltrate it now and it will stick in like a sponge, you know. But an overgrazed permanent pasture, it's not going to do that. So we must protect the permanent pastures that we've got, and we must manage them well as well. But the meadows, as we will call them, those ones that are reseeded more regularly on like a silage rotation, ryegrass, yeah, it yields fantastic, but it's really shallow rooted. It only yields really well because of the fertiliser that we're putting on, which has obvious environmental problems as well. So if we can get species-rich lay put in there instead, real diverse root depth, we're going to help the soil, we're going to help the microbiology within the soil, we're going to help the water infiltration on that, we're going to help in dry weather, we're going to help in wet weather and that as well. So on the shoulders of the year, we can get an extended grazing season on that as well. We've got health benefits in terms of the minerals and stuff that's put up. It's a win-win really, putting in a good, a good mixed sward within any grassland situation. But the permanent pasture is really the crown jewels of it really. The old permanent pastures, we mustn't destroy them to try and put in a herbal layer with loads of modern species in, because those ancient species that are potentially in that permanent pasture, we really must protect them.
We've got a minute. Sam, do you want to, are you happy with those answers?
Yeah, I think it's also important to remember that different methods are going to suit different farmers. So I think I had herbal lays before you did, but it took me a long time to realise that my old pastures that were actually doing more for the soil. Those roots, that aggregation in the soil was actually better in the old pastures, because I would have been tempted that they needed to come out and herbal lays needed to go in, and it's not the case. But also, coming from Sussex, coming from a 1,000-acre council farm down south originally, where it's mostly arable, I know that if I went there, they'd want to jump in a tractor and go out with a sward lifter to tackle the problem. So it's remembering that these are people on the ground, it's hearts and minds, as well as viable businesses that we're trying to work with.
I think time has lost us. Thanks again very much for coming and sitting with us and listening and answering questions and being here. Thanks to Sam, James, Nick and Alex and myself. Thank you.